Let's talk about how to use Primary Crux, but more importantly, how the different Primary Arcanes change your builds in crazy ways. At max rank, Primary Crux adds 30% status chance and 6% ammo efficiency per headshot hit, stacking 10 times for a total of 300% status chance and 60% ammo efficiency. I have two different judgments for when to use Crux in the randomizer. The first and most important is obviously just having a damaging status effect on the build, which is usually either fire, slash, or blast. But the other important one is that the weapon has to easily hit 10 headshots within a few seconds, and be able to consistently land at least one headshot before the 10-second timer resets. Now this doesn't mean that only bullet hoses work for this, as there's a bunch of primary weapons that have infinite body punch through, and bullets that are girthy enough to hit multiple heads per shot. The Torid Incarnon is one of my favorite examples of this. It has infinite body punch through, but because it's a bow, you have access to split flights, which gives 100% multi-shot per hit, up to 4 stacks. Split flights only has a 2-second timer, so this is definitely a weapon that's best used when basically every enemy on the map is right in front of you. The ammo efficiency is useless, but the status chance takes you from 1 guaranteed fire proc to potentially 2 with absurd damage. But most of the other Crux weapons are much simpler. I have a pretty large amount of weapons in the randomizer like the Boltor Incarnon that are strong enough to add blast, turning the weapon into a crowd clearing monster. For me, adding blast damage has made almost a dozen weapons viable to use in the randomizer. This is a weapon where I don't use Galvanized Aptitude, and instead I'm using Hammershot because of the absurd crit and damage stats, meaning I'm usually obliterating enemies in the first couple shots, but Aptitude is still super valuable. Now compare that to the new weapon Reconifex, which is just a crazy weapon in general. It does have Galvanized Aptitude because the bullets have way lower damage. The unique mechanic of the active reload gives every shot guaranteed fire procs, so I've added Hunter Munitions as well, meaning I have my 3 favorite damage status effects. Although I think you could replace that with something else and still work fine. Another important weapon type to mention are shotguns like Kuva Sobek. With certain shotguns, the ratio of multi-shot to status chance can heavily change how the weapon plays, especially for a weapon like Sobek, where I have blast damage on it. Now Sobek will always be in a league of its own, which is why I mentioned it. The augment clip delegation gives 225% multi-shot and status if you land 15 shots of your mag. Primary Crux makes it much easier to get the buff, but it also adds even more status for a total of 525% status chance, meaning you'll be clearing the blast procs absurdly fast. But blast damage has also expanded my randomizer to even weirder weapons. The Dera Incarnon is just a slow rifle with 3 meter punch through, but it does enough damage that the status from Crux almost guarantees a blast proc that explodes immediately, since the gun can basically one-shot all trash mobs. This leads to a crazy cascade of damage that means you can basically just spray left and right and watch as only a few shots can wipe an entire crowd of enemies, one after another like a chain reaction. And the last weapon I want to mention is kind of a troll. It's the Battacor, but I think the number of rolls on that ribbon should show this build is not practical. The main trick is that with the Augment Sentient Surge, it removes the AoE on the alt-fire laser, but Blast adds it right back. Now telling my community to roll free blast on a Riven is just stupid, but that's also my build can look very similar to the Reconifex for that general usability. It still functions great as a classic blast full auto, but if you want to flex, you can just dump the alt fire over and over into a crowd, just like the Torid Incarnon. But just like the other videos, I also want to mention the other arcane choices for primaries, as they're super interesting. Shotguns have access to Shotgun Vendetta, which gives a 15-second buff of 180% multi-shot and 75% reload speed when you kill an enemy within 5 meters. The only real downside is there's a couple AoE shotguns that love this arcane, but unless you have knockdown resistance on your build, you'll be self-staggering every time. Multi-shot is just really fun to mess around with on shotguns, and is definitely worth testing to adjust builds. But I have 2 weapons that offer a pretty interesting trade-off between Crux and Vendetta. Those are Convectrix and Phage. They're beam weapons, so multi-shot doesn't actually create more damage ticks, it just acts as another damage multiplier. Both of those weapons have blast damage to add that 5 meter AoE, which is basically constantly proccing. So you have a choice between Crux for more blast procs with ammo efficiency for more bullets, or Vendetta to have higher damage blast procs, while the reload speed retains the usability, but obviously uses more ammo. I found that Vendetta was slightly better because you're already proccing infinite amounts of blast procs, but Crux was still a close second, although I think it does suffer against high value targets like Acolytes. There's also Primary Blight and Primary Frostbite. Frostbite adds crit damage and multi-shot per cold status up to 40 stacks for a total of 120% crit damage and 90% multi-shot for 12 seconds, while Blight also adds crit damage and multi-shot per toxin status for a total of 144% crit damage and 72% multi-shot. The only thing for basically all of my builds is that I'm either using Viral or Blast as my double element, so that automatically locks me out of Frostbite. But my community has enjoyed using it on corrosive cold builds. Primary Blight is super strong, but most of my builds don't really have mod slots available to just add it in, so I mostly just use it on Torid Incarnon and the Vermisplicer Kit Gun Primary because they both have built-in toxin damage. Funny enough, they're incredibly similar, although with way different stats. They're both chain beams, which means the multi-shot is just another damage multiplier on top of crit damage, meaning that the endless amounts of blast procs will get a massive buff. And the final unique arcane that has to be mentioned is Longbow Sharpshot for bows. At max rank, it gives 300% bonus damage to the next shot every time you land a headshot. This damage bonus actually multiplies the damage of mods like Serration or Heavy Caliber, which makes it an insane buff. This is the other choice for weapons like the Paris Incarnon that also use split flights. Here's Dread Incarnon with the Unseen Dread augment. And honestly, I'm both surprised and on board with the fact that DE allows split flights to work on bows like this. It really does make it so much easier to land headshots and proc the invisibility. The Dread Incarnon still has built-in fire damage, but I felt it was important to still use Sharpshot on at least one of the strong bows. That damage buff takes the slash procs from Hunter Munitions and the rare fire procs to a whole nother level that's just so satisfying. And the last one to talk about is good old-fashioned Primary Merciless. Even with so many options available, Merciless is still the easiest and simplest to use on any build, and I still have a ton of weapons that can only really use Merciless. It's a weird walk down memory lane to revisit some Merciless weapons. Kuva Bramma feels so ancient, but after such a long time, I do actually like it more than Kuva Zar. Their stats are strangely close together, with some wins and losses on each side. In the end, they're both blast-only, mag-dump room nukes that only refund 1 bullet per ammo. Thankfully, they still do enough damage to deal with Acolytes, but the only reason I like Bramma more is there's no round reloading, so I can just dump forever and refill with ammo mutation. And finally, an old classic, the Acceltra Prime has been a favorite of mine since it came out. I know some people use Crux to help with ammo efficiency, but even with Vigilante Supplies, which is the worst ammo mutation mod, I never had ammo troubles. Hunter Munitions is so fun with the damage boosts giving you one of the most brainless, anti-aiming weapons in the game. And it still does pretty good damage against high-value targets. I want to hear what your favorite primary weapons are, and which arcanes you use the most in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. If you're new to Warframe or you enjoy this breakdown, I'm live Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific time, so feel free to ask any questions you want live.